is starting. And let's wait for it to pop up over here.
Cool. Can I see the questions too? If I go to the page?
Yeah, let me send you the link.
Okay.
I'll send you the link via Facebook Messenger.
Or I can figure
here's
it out
the
from
link.
Facebook, yeah.
So there's the link to where you can see. You'll just have to pause the video when it pops up. And it might eat some of your bandwidth, but it shouldn't be so bad.
I see, gotcha.
We're live though. We're good. So welcome to another live event. I'm here with Mike. How do you say your last name, Mike? Mutzel or
Yeah,
Mutzel?
Tristan, it's Mutzel, kind of like Mutzel, but Mutzel.
Muscle, like
No,
a cross between a muscle. So it's like a cross between a muscle and a pretzel.
Kind of like that, yeah. It's German, so.
Like a muscular. Nice. I like it, man. It's a good name. Mike Mutzel of High Intensity Health. Mike Mutzel has got one of the most underrated YouTube channels. Anytime he puts out an interview, I am sure to watch it. Sometimes I link to his stuff because I really dig what he does. So Mike Mutzel of High Intensity Health. We're going to talk about ketosis, gut health, functional medicine, and pretty much whatever piques our interest. Mike, where are you at right now?
You know what? Great question. Well, first of all, Tristan, thanks for having me on. I've been a fan of your channel for a while. I think we started roughly around the same time back in like 2014. I remember seeing you pop up. So congrats on all the success you've had. And yeah, right now I'm in Seattle, Washington in my home. I used to do a lot of these interviews kind of in this room and stuff like that. And then decided that, like, you know, how we kind of talked about offline, you know, the energy is much better in person. So I've been in this functional medicine space for the past 10 years and have really met a lot of wonderful practitioners that have these big clinics, and they have so much good info to say and share. So I was like, why don't I just bring my camera gear and like interview them and so forth. So that's kind of the background on the about the YouTube channel. Yeah.
And how did you get into the whole functional medicine world?
Yeah, really good question. You know, kind of serendipitously, it's like, I'm sure you found, you know, even with yourself and people that you've interviewed, a lot of us kind of come into this health world through our own challenges and things like that. And so long story short, I've been involved in fitness for quite a while. Started lifting weights pretty hardcore back in like 1997. And then in like 2003 range, hurt my back doing deadlifts. Just kind of, it was kind of dieting down for like a spring break type trip, you know, in college and whatnot, and was lifting too heavy. It was like 405 and whatever. So hurt my back, got into cycling as a way to, you know, like competitive cycling, because that's all I could really do for a fitness standpoint, and lost a lot of muscle. Then felt sick, like low energy. I was really sensitive to light and had low testosterone, low libido, and started Googling, like, you know, overexercise associated adrenal dysfunction and HPA axis dysfunction. So I didn't know anything about functional medicine, or, you know, that there was such a thing as integrative medicine at that time, and so I went and saw a medical doctor. Was like, you know, something's wrong with me. And they just tested my hormones and said, oh yeah, you have low adrenal output, low testosterone. The only real thing that we have for you, sir, is to put you on testosterone. I'm like, well, that's it? Like, there's nothing else we can do? They didn't address my diet, lifestyle, overtraining, sleep, anything. And I thought, man, this is really, you know, kind of weird. So anyway, long story short, I met a functional medicine practitioner and then found out about this whole industry. So then in 2006, started working for a supplement company called Biotics Research in Denver, Colorado. And that's where I met a lot of these people, even folks like Lauren Cordain back then. This was kind of before the paleo diet really got a lot of momentum. There was a lot of small little workshops and nightly meetings about that, Robert Crayon and others. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it and discover this whole world now, that which thankfully, I mean, functional medicine and integrative medicine is gaining a lot of steam now. Cleveland Clinic and even, you know, Baylor and all these other universities that are known to be very traditional are embracing this whole systems biology and understanding that, you know, the immune system is connected to the metabolic system and the gut is connected to the brain and so forth. So it's exciting to see. And so that's, you know, again, going back to kind of how we met and so forth. So that's, you know, on YouTube, I like to interview these people and share that information with the public at large. I feel like, you know, the pie is not quite big enough. You know, we have, anytime you watch, you know, football or the election, you know, whatever in the States, there's drug commercials and commercials about, you know, devices and surgeries, but we don't hear about real food and, you know, how the body's connected. So yeah, that's a long-winded way of how I got into this whole space.
Yeah, it seems like there's a common thread there with people who kind of get fed up with the whole like drug and shrug approach. You know, you just you go to a doctor and you assume that these individuals are well educated enough to be able to really help you. And a lot of these people, they want to help, but it seems like the education is maybe lacking. And that's where I think this whole YouTube thing has really taken off in the last, 5-6 years. And there's just flourished this this wealth of information. And the whole functional medicine thing is very fascinating. How would you briefly define what functional medicine is, and how is it differing from normal allopathic medicine?
Yeah, wonderful point. And to your point on the YouTube thing, I think a lot of people recognize that the doctor of the future is the patient, and so we should really, all of us, right? You, me, everyone should really be taking our own action, and the onus is on us to be healthy. We can't just go to a doctor and get a pill or get a surgery and then expect that we're going to be healthy and not have to participate. So along those lines, like functional medicine is really participatory, meaning that the patient is really involved in the medicine, and also it's really just looking at the root cause. So instead of saying, okay, well, you have high blood pressure, we're going to give you a blood pressure medication, it's looking and saying, okay, Tristan, why do you have elevated blood pressure? Why are you anxious? Why are you chronically thirsty? What's at the root cause of those imbalances? And let's address that and look at, the psychosocial components, your diet, your stress, your energy, kind of look at the whole picture. So that's really the difference.
So you're looking at multiple systems interacting with other systems rather than just trying to kind of what most traditional medicine approaches, or I wouldn't even say traditional. I mean, this is the traditional medicine approach. If you look at traditional Chinese medicine, if you look at Ayurveda, if you look at any of these ancient, medicine practices and healing practices, shamanism, whatever you want to look at, it's all looking at things as a holistic system. It's not isolating one thing like, oh, your blood pressure is high. Let's give you this blood pressure medication that's going to lower your blood pressure. And it's also going to give you these side effects. Your wiener is going to stop working, and you might break out in hives, and you might have some, minor psychosis, but everything's going to be okay because your blood pressure will be low. I mean, there's so, I think this is a very important aspect of the functional medicine world. And it's sad and funny to see how there seems to be kind of a backlash sometimes from individuals that are in the more, the Western medicine system. But it seems like the functional medicine practitioners are utilizing both Western medicine practices. Like, you'll see individuals recommending that, obviously antibiotics have their place. There's not a dogmatic system that's only, we only use herbs, and you got to light up your chakras. And it's not really like that, but there seems to be kind of a backlash and almost like a smear campaign to make it seem like this. Like there's a bunch of hippie naturopaths just going to try to get you to smoke weed all day. But it seems like it's a very balanced approach that takes the best of both worlds, the best of integrative medicine and lifestyle, as well as using, intense, even pharmaceuticals when appropriate. Am I right?
Well, and to that your point there, I think it's important to recognize, and this was Martha Herbert. She's a neurologist at Harvard. She was part of a kind of an online summit that I put together called the Autism Intensive. Long story short, she said kind of the main difference between like integrative medicine and traditional medicine is integrative medicine looks at the networks. And so that's, if you hold that thought, that's what really excites me about the ketogenic diet, because it works on all these different networks in a positive way. And so it's like pulling all these different strings, whether it's mitochondrial function, brain function, the immune system, and so forth. Whereas traditional medicine is like a hammer. So you're hammering down, really, if we look at, like you mentioned, antibiotics, they're a hammer on the microbiome, right? You're obliterating entire phyla, genre, and species of bacteria, which if you have a systemic infection, that's a good thing, right? But knowing all the network effects that the microbiome has on our brain function, our immune function, our physiology, stress response. And that's when we see issues like obesity associated with antibiotic exposure, for example. So that's the thing. So a drug like a statin is a hammer on the, HMG-CoA reductase pathway. So it's lowering cholesterol, but what else is connected to cholesterol metabolism, hormones, and everything else, right? So that's the thing where it's like, we need to look at the body. So again, to kind of summarize, going back to your 2 questions ago, what is functional medicine? It's really network medicine. It's looking at the body and the environment, circadian rhythm exposures, looking at all this in a network. And you mentioned like in Ayurveda or Chinese medicine, they do look at the body in a system, in a network of sorts. And so that's where, if we look at dietary therapies like, improving bacterial diversity, eating more curcumin, things like that to improve the network of the microbiome, and also carbohydrate restriction in a high fat style diet, how that improves the network of our mitochondria, of our metabolism in the brain. And so, that's what really gets me excited about this whole ketogenic thing, because it's not just about epilepsy. It's not just about fat loss. It's not just about diabetes. It's about all these things put together. And it makes a lot of sense in my opinion. And it's also, I think, probably better for the environment too, in many ways, which again, goes back to this whole network thing. So hopefully that makes sense to people to start looking. So, because people have questions about food, like, what foods do I eat? What are my macros? Should I eat 40 grams of carbs or 50 grams of carbs? And get so, caught up in the weeds of these little nuances. And it's like, okay, step back and look at how that's going to affect the network of your life, the context of your life. Are you lifting that day or not? Are you not? Are you traveling? Are you stressed? All these things, like, picture that in this network, because they're all connected.
Right, right. And it's funny because it's even in this world where people understand that, that you can vastly affect all your systems, your hormonal system, your gut microbiome, all of these systems through making dietary interventions. People are still looking for the one hammer that's going to work for every single nail out there. Yeah. And, I mean, I'm seeing some comments right here from the audience, guys. We do see your comments. We don't always answer all the questions, but I do see a couple relevant comments here.
For sure.
One individual says they cut their blood pressure meds in half after just 3 weeks on a keto diet and lots of exercise. So, I mean, there's one example right there of an N of 1 of somebody doing a dietary intervention, cutting their blood pressure in half. Now, it's kind of interesting because people think that, oh, you're going to be eating all this fat, you're going to be intaking a lot of sodium and having a lot of salt. Isn't that going to shoot your blood pressure up? Well, look at this. This person's blood pressure dropped. And
Right.
can you attest to seeing some more testimonials like this, or is this just the one individual, the one unique snowflake out there?
Yeah, well, I think it comes back again to the whole network, and so there's many aspects related to like control points that affect blood pressure. Now, I would just say that like that's one where, again, there's good drugs and bad drugs, like you kind of mentioned, and like, for example, like there's some actually pretty good medicines that lower blood pressure, for example, that don't have a lot of side effects and have anti-aging properties. So that'd be one to maybe like, yeah, you want to be proud of getting off a statin maybe, but there are like the angiotensin receptor blockers have some anti-aging properties. So there's doctors out there that actually recommend really like almost homeopathic levels of some of these medicines. So in contrast, like thiazide diuretics that affect blood pressure have a lot of negative side effects and are linked with insulin resistance and so on. So I commend whoever the person is for lowering their blood pressure, but definitely check with your practitioner and make sure there aren't other issues associated with that before you start tinkering, with that. Because with blood pressure, it is complex. You can lower your daytime blood pressure, but you can be what's known as a non-dipper, for example. And so some people, their daytime blood pressure will be low, but at night it is increased. And so we should actually have a drop in our diastolic blood pressure with night. So I learned, this is again, functional medicine, interviews and whatever, Mark Houston, it's on YouTube if you want to check that out. So he really talks about that. So I would recommend, anyone that does have elevated blood pressure, for example, make sure that you're doing 24-hour monitoring. You can get this from your doctor. They'll give you a device to go home and check that out, because that could be important. But obviously, yeah, we do hear, Tristan, to your question, I mean, whether it's diabetes, drugs, blood pressure, anxiety, I think the biggest one that I see people, obviously is weight loss. They're really excited about the weight that they lose and things like that. And then mental clarity. So things like anxiety or being short-tempered, particularly in men, they're really, I'm kind of impulsive and, get frustrated with traffic and things like that, so that, being in a state of ketosis, whether it's the GABA to glutamate ratios, and people have kind of talked about that. Those are the things that I see the most in terms of like effects, particularly short term after just a few weeks.
Yeah, yeah. No, very interesting. So here's a Here's another little question I think is interesting. It's kind of a transition going back to the functional medicine. Um, oh, before I do want to touch on, I mean, people seem to think when you start looking at diet, right? People
Mhm.
think that diet is like the only thing that's going to affect all these things. And then they start to just hyper focus on, well, I've got to get my macronutrient right. I got to make sure I'm getting my micronutrients in, and then can completely miss some of these other things that you mentioned, like anxiety, anger, just the management of our emotional, mental, and our psychological or spiritual, whatever you want to look at it, whatever level you want to look at it, but our state of being, and that's going to affect profoundly things like blood pressure and even inflammation levels. So yeah, I mean, those are some really good points you made there. Now, and Andrew Artiega, he's a regular viewer and a good guy. He's actually in the integrative health program at the University of Denver, Colorado.
Cool.
And he's asking, what's a good route to take in terms of getting out there into the functional medicine and integrative medicine world? His parents, okay. So it's a question of fear, like an economic lack, right? His parents are telling him, "You're not going to make any money. You got to be a real doctor, man." What would you
Yeah.
say to somebody who's going through some decisions like that, trying to study functional medicine, but he's getting input from friends and family like, dude, you're not going to make any money. You're just being a hippie. Go to get a real doctor degree.
Right. Well, so my what I would say to that is actually real doctors. Like if you think of family medicine or internal medicine, so you have the flu, you go to the doctor, right? Robots are taking over that. So robots can actually diagnose and kind of decision diamond what your symptom set is associated with much better than humans can. And so read the book, The Whole Brain by Daniel Pink, or A Whole New Mind, maybe it's called A Whole New Mind. So, this is not new information, whether it's accounting, legal stuff, just basic family medicine. Robots are going to be taking that over, folks. And again, this isn't a knock on the human being or professions. I have a lot of friends that are functional medicine, family medicine doctors, but they understand that the future it doesn't look so good when it comes to just treating these traditional things. Oh, you have a cough? Okay. Well, then what's the next test that we're going to run? Or your blood pressure is high? A robot can do that. But what robots can't do is have compassion with individuals and kind of look at the whole person and figure out all these different abstract things, like you mentioned, that are going on in their life. Are they anxious? Are they getting enough sleep? Do they have a lot of EMFs in their home, right? Is there a lot of stress in the home? Is there mold toxicity, heavy metals? Do they have enough meaning and purpose or community or friends? I mean, that's a big component that we often don't talk enough about that plays a huge role. Because it is, my friend Sachin Mattel, him and I were talking about this, is people get more and more healthy. Unfortunately, their social network tends to actually, while they may get more and more friends online and be part of support groups and keto groups or low carb circles or whatever, their social network tends to kind of fall apart because they're not drinking as much alcohol. Maybe they quit smoking. Maybe they're not eating, they don't want to go to, Applebee's or Chili's with their friends anymore because they want to go to Whole Foods, and then their friends are not yet on the Whole Foods bandwagon. So I think, again, the whole point is there's this huge network that influences this thing we call health or vitality, and it's all interconnected. And it takes a really smart practitioner to understand how this network influences the phenotype that we call health and vitality. So what I would say to that person is absolutely pursue your passions, because you're going to be so bored out of your mind practicing in a model that you don't believe in, like practicing allopathic medicine if you don't believe in allopathic medicine. And again, all you have to do is read that book, A Whole New Mind by Daniel Pink, and he has all the research in there about how robots are really taking over a large part of medicine, and doing a lot of the triage. And so it takes, the compassionate human being that can be empathetic and understand humans and what they're going through to really heal them, right? And so that's where a lot of people get healing occurs when someone just listens to them and hears out what's going on in their life, kind of like a counselor. And that's where a lot of functional medicine doctors are really doing, is sitting down with an hour with a patient, hearing their life story, trying to figure out what's going on, putting the pieces of the puzzle together and giving them a lifestyle prescription. And unfortunately, a robot can't do that, which is the good news for practitioners that really want to help people. So that would be my tip.
So I guess, yeah, that was a beautiful answer, man. Kind of really comes down to the humanity of it, right? It's like, how can there be healing if there's without humanity, without that interact. Interesting what you mentioned about when people do start to get healthy, their social network shrinks. And yeah, that's totally true. I mean, you even without looking at like the whole diet aspect, you might just start realizing that you've been kind of full of shit for many years, and that you know that your social circle and your social network is keeping you in this bubble of falseness. And you might realize, look, I don't even relate to these people around me. We're just going through the motions. And you might need to break out of that as as a way to move forward, as a way to to become healthy and to become the individual that you are able to be, the individual that you may be meant to become. So I think this is I think this is a really important aspect, the social and human aspects of it. So hope that helps,
I
Andrew.
mean, it's interesting that you bring that up. I mean, it's so much more intellectually stimulant to talk about like mitochondrial biogenesis and intermittent fasting and like eating within certain windows and nerd out on all that stuff. But I think this conversation that we're having really needs to be said, because a lot of people do have these relationships that are built on like false premises, like, oh yeah, we have a lot in common because we like to drink a lot, or we like the same wine, but really the conversation oftentimes, if it involves substances or poor food choices or things like that, is not very deep. And so I think when people make these huge shifts in their life, and I'm talking like sweeping shifts, spirituality, they start meditating, they're going to bed at regular times, eating more real food, they kind of crave deeper, more meaningful conversations and things like that. And sometimes that's hard to kind of find, and so I think that's a really important part of functional medicine, really, because when you go, and this dovetails into that other question, is like, how do you learn more? I've had a lot of healing myself through the Institute for Functional Medicine, because you find like-minded people and you meet people that are interested in the same goals. So that's the other part about pursuing something that you're passionate about, whether it's going to ketogenic conferences, low carb conferences, functional medicine, integrative medicine conferences, is you're going to find people with that same mindset. And so you're not going to feel like you're stranded on an island in Baltimore where no one else is eating low carb and meditating, right? So you're going to find like-minded people that will help you, kind of, you'll just feel more confidence in the processes and lifestyle choices that you're making, not so much like the odd duck of the family kind of thing.
Yeah, so important. I mean, the community aspect of it. And yeah, I mean, we can always come back to that, and I think that's something that that is often overlooked, and because it's such a, I want to say subjective. It's not really a subjective thing. This is objectively important, but your experience is subjective. Everybody's own connection to life, to the this incredible mystery that we inhabit, and that we are here exploring together. I think it's really important, the community aspect of it. So let's keep that in mind. We can always go back to it, but let's talk a little bit about gut health. I think the ketogenic diet, as if there's only one way to do it, right? I mean, there's hundreds of different ways to do keto. There's 100 different ways to do it unhealthily, and I mean, we're all about. I think both of us are all about optimizing it for the individual, optimizing it for you and for your life, and adapting and adopting a lifestyle that suits you and that supports you so that you can live, a full, rich, and vibrant life. How does gut health play into the ability to live a full, rich, and vibrant life and to be healthy and happy? I know that's such a huge, broad question, but I mean, we can go wherever you want with this, man. Whatever you've been interested in lately, we can start broad and go specific, or jump right into specifics even. But I mean, the gut is fascinating. People talk about the gut-brain axis. You got the vagus nerve that connects your gut to your brain. The microbiome is intimately connected with so many different physiological processes, inflammation processes, and whatnot. So how does a high fat diet affect the gut microbiome? And perhaps a good place to start is with the critique that we often see that I think there was an article that always floating around, says something like, sorry, low carbers, your gut's just not into you. There's a lot of people who critique a low carb diet, saying that is bad for gut bacteria. Why are there conflicting reports on this when you've got like Perlmutter saying it's good?
Yeah, this is a really awesome. I'm so happy to talk about this. And first of all, I mean, I'm not out there doing research in the laboratory. My knowledge is through reading peer reviewed journals and then talking to some of these people. But you mentioned something, and I think it's important: the vagal nerve. So this kind of information highway from the gut to the brain and vice versa. What's really interesting about that is dietary fat actually positively can upregulate the communication network between, and stimulate the vagal nerve. And it has to do with cholecystokinin, a gut hormone called CCK, that many people, if they've studied biology, know it's involved in stimulating the gallbladder to release bile and motility and so forth. But it turns out that that's also when we innervate this vagal nerve, we actually induce a more of a rest and digest phenotype within our autonomic nervous system, the so-called parasympathetic branch of our autonomic nervous system. So, when we do things like after we have sex, for example, or we coddle our child, when we do yoga, when we meditate, when we do heart rate variability biofeedback, using heart math and so on, we innervate this nerve as well, more from like the top down. So from the brain to the gut. What's really interesting is when you chew your food mindfully, when you have phytonutrients, and I know, Tristan, you're a fan of things like curcumin, resveratrol, blueberry polyphenols, herbs and botanicals, green tea, garlic, all these things stimulate this vagal nerve, which is a very powerful way to kind of induce this relaxation response. And, to be totally frank with you, I was not very excited about the ketogenic diet for a while. So I wrote this book called The Belly Fat Effect. And, I was just narrow-minded all about microbiome, the various ways that the microbiome affects fat burning and mitochondrial function and all that. It's like 1,800 references. I was just, for 5 years, I read only microbiome stuff and ignored all the ketogenic stuff. And, to a lot of the microbiome researchers are not fans of high fat diets necessarily, for reasons I'll address in a minute. But anyway, the point of that story was a friend, Alessandro Ferretti, who got me kind of re-excited about the ketogenic diet in 2014, was like, yeah, we were having a conversation at a functional medicine meeting. And he's like, yeah, I've been doing this ketogenic thing. And I'm like, oh yeah, how's that going? He's like, it's absolutely amazing. I go, well, what's the biggest thing that you found? He's like, well, it improves my heart rate variability. So that's the beat to beat variability between consecutive heartbeats. And we want a lot of resilience. So this means that we can withstand stressors. We're more basically resilient, more vibrant. So that piqued my interest right away, because heart rate variability is a proxy for longevity. It's independently correlated with all-cause mortality and a lot of things. So I was really intrigued. And that's where I discovered how dietary fats, anyway, that conversation, I should say, stimulated me to dive further into the research. And that's what got me really excited, again, about the ketogenic diet. I kind of first tried it periodically in 2002 as the bodybuilders back then. And I thought it was just manipulating macronutrients, and there wasn't any other additional network or physiologic effects. So I kind of brushed it off as like a short-term weight loss strategy and didn't, look deeper under the hood. Anyway, so that's one poignant way that dietary fats can affect how we feel, the microbiome and the gut-brain connection. But another really striking example of this whole gut metabolic connection and how it's related to diet is gastric bypass surgery. So for folks that live in the United States, we all know that, roughly 71% of US adults are either overweight or obese. And so this surgical procedure called gastric bypass, bariatric surgery, is very popular, particularly in Alabama and Texas and Florida and some of the states where the obesity prevalence is really high. So if you ask,
in the United Arab Emirates, the government is giving them away for free. I'm sure you know about this. I get a lot of clients from UAE for some reason, and they give it away for free because it's such an epidemic there, the obesity.
wow,
But yeah,
that is news to me. That's crazy. Well, so here's what's interesting about this procedure, Tristan, is it doesn't really, like, 9 out of 10, traditional doctors, if you were to survey them and say, okay, how does gastric bypass surgery cause weight loss? And they're going to say, oh, it's really simple. It's just like calories in, calories out. You're restricting how much food people can eat. And you go, actually, the science shows that's not at all true. The way that the mechanism of action, the pharmacology of the procedure, I should say, is by changing gut bacterial diversity. So when and changing gut hormones. So those are kind of the three mechanisms. The third one is reducing bacterial endotoxin absorption. And I just want to put a sticky note on that. We'll come back to it, Tristan. This, I think, is the most important missing link when it comes to a healthily prepared ketogenic diet versus an unhealthy prepared plan, where you have the people that are just doing bacon and eggs and no vegetables or fruits, they can absorb these endotoxin containing particles and they can cause a lot of inflammation. And so that's where I think we get this keto flu. Some people are like, oh man, I have a headache, I feel sick, I'm lethargic, I have the flu-like symptoms. I don't have a lot of evidence to support this or to test this, but I strongly believe, after talking to a lot of different doctors, that it's this endotoxin absorption. So anyway,
that's a fascinating point. I'm sorry to interrupt you. That's such a fascinating point. It just really makes me think, because I mean, usually one of the best ways to, one of the things that I always tell clients is, eat at least 1 to 2 avocados a day. Even if you're not able to get in like enough leafy greens, if you don't like your vegetables, you're not used to eating it, just try to eat an avocado twice a day. And that almost always helps with keto flu. And one would assume, oh, it's got potassium in it. But I mean, it could be greatly influencing the absorption of the endotoxin by providing some beneficial soluble and insoluble fiber in there. And that's something I've never thought about, and I'm really glad you brought that up. It's a new twist on it.
Well, that's really interesting too, because avocados, while they're high fat, they're not going to increase bacterial endotoxin absorption. So that's kind of the thing where we see a lot of and as much as I love butter and love ghee, we have a whole ghee thing this big in my refrigerator right now, put it on everything. Ghee will actually really increase endotoxin absorption. So if you're going to have a lot of ghee and a lot of butter and like olive oil, you need to have rosemary and garlic and make sure you're getting your vegetables. So that's, again, kind of where I see, people doing things wrong. They're like, well, I did keto, but I actually gained weight, or my, I got more insulin resistant, or my autoimmune flared, or whatever the case may be. It's like, just like you're saying, Tristan, well, it's not just about total macros. It's like, you need to break down them. Where are they coming from? And things like avocado, walnuts, Brazil nuts, they're not going to really dramatically increase this bacterial endotoxin absorption. But as much as I love grass-fed animal and ghee, that will. And so this is, again, going back to this network, this big picture where we need to look at the phytonutrients. So yeah, again, gastric bypass procedure manipulates the gut in 3 main ways: the gut hormones, reducing endotoxin, and then improving bacterial diversity. And so that's kind of what's cool about this procedure, in one sense. Again, I'm not promoting the procedure at all. I just want to clarify that, is we can mimic the pharmacology and the mechanisms of the procedure naturally. So things like whey protein will increase gut hormones, rosemary, garlic, ginger, curcumin, all these phytonutrients found in a real food diet. Guess what? They will improve bacterial diversity, reduce bacterial endotoxin. And like we just talked about with the case of the avocado versus ghee butter, the choices of your fats in pairing ghee butter with, say, rosemary and garlic and kale, for example, will reduce the endotoxin absorption. So that's what's really exciting about that. So since understanding, how the gut plays a role in weight loss through gastric bypass, there's been a whole myriad of research that's emerged about the microbiome and the role that the gut plays in metabolic physiology. So I'm sure you have some questions.
All right, so let's get into some of the problems people run into with the microbiome, right? I mean, the microbiome thing is huge now. Like, everybody's talking about what's the gut, it's your gut bacteria. You've got ubiome. You've got all these tests that people can, test exactly what is in their poo-poo. So, I'd like to maybe even get into some of the interesting stuff about the specifics. I don't want to leave the audience too far behind, but this is something that I've always been fascinated with, is it's like, all right, so say somebody's got something like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO. What would be a, functional medicine approach to actually dealing with this? And I've heard a lot of your interviews. I've heard you asking a lot of other people questions, but you, like any good interviewer, which I'm not, you don't interject your own opinions very much in there. So I think it's a good opportunity for me to kind of ask you, like, what do you think is a good approach to dealing with something like, for instance, SIBO, or like ulcerative colitis, for instance, somebody who's got, or like IBSD, IBSC. I just gave you like a whole bunch of different things, but let's start with SIBO. A lot of people are worried about SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth.
Right, as you mentioned, started interviewing a lot of gut people in 2014. That's how I kind of got started on YouTube a little bit, but it's interesting. There's a lot of people that are think that SIBO is kind of one of these things that And again, I've personally, had SIBO before, and I think we're all susceptible to having bacterial overgrowth. If we have a lot of refined sugars, we take opiate-based medicines that really, slow down our motility. We take proton pump inhibitors and Nexium, and these things are, and have stagnant bowels. And eat a lot of fermentable carbs, like we're going to have imbalances of microbes in places of our intestines, like the small intestine, where there shouldn't be high amounts. So, this is where I think the ketogenic diet, one of the applications, although it hasn't totally been studied, is in the context of SIBO. And it's really, if you think of like one of the, Dr. Pimental, I think he's at UCLA. He's kind of done a lot of the SIBO research, and one of the therapies is like this elemental diet, where you're getting like literally food in a can. It's kind of like Ensure but cleaner, and you're getting your amino acids, some like MCTs, and no carbohydrates for like a couple weeks. The idea is you're kind of starving out these bacteria in the small intestine and encouraging healthy growth. And so I think, again, I don't see a lot of clients anymore. I used to, but one of the things that I recommend for as humans, like we should be able to eat a leek or a tuber. If you go to Africa, a lot of the women and children are digging around and hunting, not hunting, but gathering tubers and root vegetables and eating, a diverse array of fibers. And here we are in North America, and people came and have a leek without having to, run to the bathroom 15 times, right? So I think there's a disconnect there. And so we know without a doubt that one way to improve bacterial diversity, whether you talk to Jeff Leach or Erica and Justin Sonnenberg at Stanford University, any people that are studying the microbiome, is we need to fuel them. We need fiber, right? So that's one of the things about this whole gluten-free diet thing. Some people are, researchers, Liping Zhao in Shanghai, he's like one of his therapies to beneficially improve bacterial diversity is some gluten-containing grains, believe it or not. I know it sounds totally crazy to people because we've all been told that gluten-free is like the way to go, but there's a lot of researchers in the microbiome world that are not totally afraid of organic gluten. But anyway, that being said, so I think as humans, we should be able to eat fiber. And if you're intolerant to fiber, then work up slowly over time and, cut out a lot of the simple to digest, like processed sugars and things that will fuel unhealthy growth of bacteria. So that's what I would suggest. In herbs and botanicals, one of them like berberine, for example, has wonderful data on blood sugar. I do recommend it for people, that are keto adapting. We know that insulin sensitivity is really kind of that rate limiting factor that will enhance or decrease your ability to make ketones in the liver. So we need to be insulin sensitive. So I think berberine really helps there. I've seen good research and clinically found that to work. So yeah, I think, a healthy array of herbs and taking the fiber up slowly, like having a little bit of an onion, a little bit of a leek, things like that from vegetables in the diet, incorporating that to a point where you can tolerate fiber, and it's not an issue. But obviously you can work with a practitioner.
So rather than eliminating everything, rather than kind of just like dropping everything that you think you're sensitive to, you build up kind of an immunity to it. And it sounds like you're saying that rather than just like getting on a super restrictive diet for the rest of your life, you maybe prune back a little bit and use some of these botanicals and then start moving forward and adding these foods slowly to increase the microbiome diversity.
Yeah. Exactly right. Removing something, removing a drug, removing excessive alcohol, removing opiates. Yeah. Obviously you got to remove some things, right? But just removing leeks, like leeks didn't cause you to get SIBO. Onions didn't cause you to get SIBO. Something else did. So removing something is not necessarily fixing the root cause.
Yeah. Yeah. That completely makes so much sense. And unfortunately, a lot of people, they start exploring these things and they think that, I got to go on like a zero carb diet now because low carb is suiting me well. So maybe zero carb is going to be better. Now, what about the stuff? All right. So there seems to be some research, and these are abstracts and just, the titles of abstracts that would say, high fat diet decreases microbiome diversity, or high fat diet, can harm your microbiome, stuff like that. People are seeing headlines like that. Where is this information coming from? And is there like a context in which this is true? Or is this like across the board? Is a high fat diet going to decrease my microbiome diversity like the Facebook link might have told some people?
Yeah, this is really interesting. And to be honest, I mean, I fell for this trap back in 2010, 2011. And so we need to look at the types of fat, that are given to these animals. And so that's that, most of these studies, by the way, I just preface this, that you hear about, whether it's published in Cell or Nature or whatever, British Journal of Clinical Nutrition, they're mostly animal model studies. And so they vary the animal chow and they supplement with, instead of like corn solids, they'll add in corn oil or cottonseed oil or soybean oil. And so we know these processed oils, as I mentioned, they will increase bacterial endotoxin absorption, which is associated with the keto flu, insulin resistance, belly fat, and all that. So I think that's where things, get kind of murky, is looking at what dietary macronutrient was manipulated, not just overall fat, but what is the source of the fat. And so that's where we do see most of the challenges. And in contrast, when we see a real food type diet, John Rowe at University of Alberta Children's Hospital, he's in Calgary area, he's a neurologist. And so he actually published a study with his group showing that actually a ketogenic diet improved bacterial diversity and improved the growth of strains that are very important. These ones are a little complicated sounding, but Akkermansia muciniphila. So this is one strain that you really can't get in a probiotic. So that's why you got to eat real
And why
food.
can't you get Akkermansia in a probiotic? Why is this not available commercially?
It's not available yet, Tristan. Again, I've been in the supplement industry for 10 years and I've tried to get it. Can't get it. The other one,
you ask like some of these producers, like, can they just not produce it affordably and they don't want to do it, or what's the deal?
Yeah, it's there is a lot of, although it's generally regarded as safe, coming out with new strains can be a bit of a challenge. I know like the soil-based probiotics are with all the, oh gosh, the sporogens and so forth are kind of like new in the sense. And so I don't know what, if you just can't get it. The other one, Faecobacterium prausnitzii, you can't get at this point either. But I mean, that's good and bad. The good side of it is like those genre and species are really easy to increase if you eat a lot of vegetables. So that's just the thing. It was, okay, well, we don't have to spend a lot of money on probiotics. We can spend money elsewhere and just, get healthy vegetables, because study after study, whether it's Lipping Zhao's group in China or Zhong Rou, have shown that in humans, those bacteria increase, even in rugby players. There was a study in the UK published at the end of 2012 that showed that rugby players that had a really high calorie diet, about 3,500 calories per day, had higher levels because they're eating a lot of fruit, a lot of vegetables, protein, whey protein, and so on, that their bacterial diversity was really increased, and they had high levels of those two strains, Akkermansia and the Faecobacterium, compared to people that were on a lower calorie diet that were overweight and inactive. So, again, it's not just like you talked about, it comes back to the whole picture. It's not just what you're eating. Are you exercising too? Are you doing meditation or stress reduction? Are you happy? Are you sleeping? So these are all part of the microbiome diversity and health.
And how do we know that things like, psychological states, your level of happiness, your level of sleep, how are these things affecting it, and how do we know it? I mean, can we kind of get into some of the nitty gritty, nerdy details on some of these?
Yeah, you mean like how anxiety or stress or mindset is affecting the gut?
So anxiety or stress, lack of sleep, which is like almost seems to be the same physiological state, right? High cortisol, like your testosterone is going to be lower. How are these affecting the gut microbiome? I mean, if they just killing off the good bugs and allowing yeast to grow, or what is it doing?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I have thought about that. So we generally think about, this kind of inside out control, where we think like, okay, the foods we eat change the microbiome, and then that changes our immune system. Like, because 80%, I'm sure you've heard this before, our mucosal immune system. So we have the lumen of our intestine. Here's the food. On the outside here, this gastrointestinal lymphoid tissue known as the gall. A lot of our mucosal and antibody producing immune cells are hanging out right there, because there's all this foreign stuff coming in that we call food, but it's foreign to the body. So they're sensing it and recognizing it. And so we generally think like, oh, the communication goes from the food we eat affects the immune system, that affects the body. But could it be the other way around? Could the immune system be affecting the microbiome? And so we call this outside in control. And so there's a lot of research. This is like totally progressive research, by the way. But there are quite a few papers on this that shows, oh, well, guess what? These immune cells, they actually crosstalk the other way around. They tell the microbiome like, hey, they release things like reactive oxygen species, reactive nitrogen species. So they do affect the composition. So and we know, and again, I'm just, I don't know the exact answer to your question, but this whole field of psychoneuroimmunology, that our thoughts and our mindset affects our immune system and nervous system and endocrine system, endocrinology, even PNIE, I think it is called. So anyway, there's all this back and forth talk, and so I think, I don't have all the data there, but I think a negative mindset affects the immune system, and then your immune system is cross-talking with the microbiome. So, it's a bi-directional communication network, right? It's not just that the microbiome affects inflammation, it's that inflammation talks via free radicals and cytokines and other signaling molecules to the microbiome. So it's a two-way street, and it makes a lot of sense, right? The gut to brain and brain to gut, like that's a two-way street, right? So we need to work on, you can't just eat the best diet in the world and be unhappy and think negative thoughts and that the world's out to get you, right? And so that's kind of the thing, is like, we got to work on the big picture. And so that's, I think you and I see eye to eye on this, because ketogenic diet is important, right? But there's this whole other thing called your life and your mindset and your beliefs and sleep that influence everything else.
Well, how many people do you know that are so happy, totally connected, doing what they love? They don't worry about their diet at all, and they live long, healthy, happy lives. And then other people who get kind of like just crazy whipped up and neurotic about it for periods of their life and hyper focus on it. The common thread seems to be that the people that are having the problems with their health are usually looking for the problems with their health, and they're always, that's that stressed out mind state of just feeling attacked. And yeah, I mean, I guess even if you're just gonna if you want to try to quantify it biologically, you could say that, like, okay, so if you're stressed out, you're going to be creating more cortisol, more adrenaline, which could be breaking down tissues, and which could be blocking other beneficial hormones that would, bring you into the anabolic state. And eventually, I mean, doesn't adrenaline have some powerful antimicrobial effects as well?
Well, yeah, and adrenaline helps with fat burning. I mean, we hear about all the bad stuff associated with that, but there's a lot of without adrenaline and norepinephrine, you couldn't burn fat, right? So that's the thing where it's like everyone talks like, oh, the adrenals are messed up, but there's some positives to the adrenals too, right? So anyway.
Well, it's crazy, right? It's all about balance. It's not like you can just say, oh, well, this is present and that's a negative thing. It's like, if you got inflammatory cytokines present, what does that mean? What is the context of it? You just want to suppress the inflammatory response all the time because maybe it's got a function. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is why I always like talking to functional medicine practitioners and people who look at things as systems within systems interacting with other systems, because when you really start to look at anything in life, you realize that there's no isolated one thing that's not being affected by its environment, internal and external. So true. All right, let's talk about, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, just to cap it off, right? I mean, we all know like an overweight person that, like you said, eats like crap, that is happy as a clam, has a lot of friends, and here we are restricting everything in the world and we still feel terrible, right? So it's like there's the happy medium. And I think, I mean, you look at people, John Candy and who's the guy in Tommy Boy and stuff. I mean, so inspiring, happy, positive people that think like the world is there to, they're a waster, right? They really have a lot of like optimism. And so that's the other part. Like some of the most miserable people I know avoid everything under the sun, don't go out. They're scared of this. They can't go to a hotel because the air's not filtered. And it's like, whoa, there's definitely, it's a U-shaped curve. And so I think we're all trying to, find that balance.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if you're trying to travel and you're so worried, like, oh, these are not cotton sheets, or they're cotton, but they're not organic. There's going to be glyphosate in it. The EMF, oh, I'm picking up, like, people carry their freaking cell phone around and are just looking for Wi-Fi. And it's like, what are you doing? We've all known people like this, especially, if you've been around people who are, electrosensitive. And I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. I'm just saying that there is a psychological component that definitely seems to be involved with these things, like, sensitivity, extreme sensitivity to electromagnetism and Wi-Fi and stuff like that. It's like, oh, if I break out, if I smell wheat, I've seen people completely change their mindset, getting it, like maybe just get a new relationship or quit their old job that they hated when they're going to work every day. If you're going to work every single day, you hate your job, you hate what you're doing, if you feel guilty about something all the time, if you're doing things that make you feel shame in your heart, I mean, if you feel this constantly, that is going to affect your immune system profoundly. So I think it's really important. You look at the connection between like high stress, like people who have, like you look at studies for ulcerative colitis and stuff like that, and there'll be a high correlation to people who have been under high stress situations. And a lot of vets will have this stuff, PTSD and correlations with IBS and stuff like that. It's very, very prevalent. So yeah, it's all about the whole system inside and out. You got anything else on that topic before we move on and I ask you
No,
about
it's
something
an
more
important
concrete?
topic. Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. It's fun to chat about it for sure.
Yeah, this is my favorite stuff, man. I mean, I love the science and I love getting into the nitty gritties about stuff, but I mean, I'm really into the human aspect above all things, because I think our experience can't even be defined linguistically, nonetheless, quantified completely in any formal system. But let's talk about the C word, Candida. Lots of people are just like, this is another thing that so many people are obsessed with. I mean, if you, especially back like maybe 2008, 2009, if you started Google doctoring yourself and you looked up whatever's going on in your life, you're going to come upon some cure zone forums of people telling you that everything under the sun is caused by Candida. So, let's talk a little bit about this. A lot of people are worried about Candida. Some people get into ketosis because they believe they've got a, Candida overgrowth, or maybe they've even actually been diagnosed with it. What's up with Candida? Where's it come from? What's its function? And then we can start getting into some of the issues that people can run into with it.
Yeah, I think a very important point. Again, I'm not an expert in this area. Interestingly, although, in the alternative space, we hear something like you mentioned. I mean, so many people talk about Candida and Candida overgrowth, and do I have Candida? What are signs and symptoms? But there's not a lot of research on Candida albicans. If you go look at clinical trials and observational trials and hard data, not that doesn't mean, obviously it exists, but I think it comes down to, again, like your mindset, and then what are you eating? Are you fueling, the food that you eat is not just feeding you, it's feeding these trillions of organisms that we call bacteria, viruses, yeast and protozoa, right? So if you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, your processed foods, carbohydrates. I know when I was doing a lot of competitive bike racing, I was doing paleo at that time. This is in 2005, 2006 era. But I would do a carb refeed to replenish my glycogen stores that were depleted, right? And so I would feel like Candida-like symptoms. And I had a buddy he just graduated from medical school, and we would always talk about this stuff on bike rides. Like, what about Candida? And, some people are just yeasty in general, right? And so they can feel it, in their gut when they have sugar, processed food. So I think, this is where the ketogenic diet, I think really has a lot of applications. But generally, as like the common symptoms that we would find, I think just a lot of bloating and uncomfortable bowels after you eat carbohydrates, particularly if they're processed. And that was me for a number of years. So is it SIBO? Is it Candida? Does SIBO cause the Candida to grow, or is it vice versa? People like Dietrich Klinghardt here in Seattle, talks about how if you have a lot of mercury and heavy metal buildup, that the Candida is actually like a compensatory overgrowth to protect the body from the mercury, right? And so he's done some data on like coal mines and stuff where they're like mining for lead and whatever, and like Candida and all this yeast go there. I don't know what the attraction is, whatever. So there's a lot of different theories, but I think it comes back to what we're saying here is like, what are you eating? Are you eating a lot of processed carbohydrates, or have you been on antibiotics? Some common questions I like people to think about is just go through your life. Were you breastfed? Were you born vaginally or C-section? Were you given antibiotics? Were you eating a real food diet or a Costco, McDonald's type diet as a child, right? So if you mark off all these boxes and it looks like you're kind of a typical North American that's eaten a lot of processed food and weren't given like an evolutionary or primal upbringing when it comes to microbiome seeding, you might have Candida and SIBO issues, right? And so I think your tolerance, like your margin of error for having processed carbohydrates or even a lot of honey or wine is small. Like you can't, if you're going to overdo it in those areas, like you're going to pay the consequences, right? So I think those are people just need to take a step back and evaluate their life. And me, myself, you may be that way too. I had a very traditional upbringing, was born vaginally, but, breastfed for like a few days and then was on infant formula. And we had a lot of Costco and processed food when I grew up. Right. So it's like, I got to really overemphasize the real food to make sure that I'm supporting my microbiome.
Yeah, same here, man. I grew up fighting over the last bit of Lucky Charms with my brother and sister.
Yeah.
Um,
It tastes
Lucky
good.
Charms, those Costco, like the Costco pastries. You ever get those as a kid? They're the
We get
crazy
the blue
pastries, and they're like,
poppy seed
yeah,
muffins.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, the blueberry muffins,
Yeah.
just so good. But like, and you look back, you're like, man, and back then it's funny because that was just what was around. I mean, in the
Yeah.
mid '90s, mid to late '90s, there wasn't that many people. I mean, especially in the suburbs of Southern California where I live, not that many people were too concerned with diet affecting, their health. We just, you get an ear infection, you go to the doctor, it gives you amoxicillin, and it tastes delicious. And you want to take an extra dose because it's pink liquid and it tastes like bubble gum, like a shot of bubble gum. It's the lifestyle, the environment that we grew up in, definitely not conducive to a healthy microbiome long term. Now, what are some other things? What are some things that you do now? We talk about a lot of theory, and you interview a lot of different people, and you ask all kinds of questions. What are some things that you implement in your life as far as diet and lifestyle go to optimize your health, to optimize your microbiome, and to for whatever your goals may be?
Yeah. Awesome question, Tristan. I'll try and answer it quick because I got another call at 1, so I got to run in a few minutes. But just in brief, what I found, like after interviewing, I think like 170 people, at this point, the kind of what I really do in my life, and I've learned this from a lot of different people, is just eat real food all the time. And so even like processed chocolate bars, we try to make our own chocolate, our own desserts with coconut milk and like raw cocoa powder. So just really make everything from scratch. And I know that sounds like super basic, but even people are eating paleo are still buying packaged foods. And I think that's a huge leap. The other thing that I do is grow a lot of our own vegetables. So we have 16 garden beds in my backyard. So we grow a ton of stuff: raspberries, leeks, onions, collards. I mean, you name it. We have it's winter now in Seattle, and we had this big freeze, so everything got zapped, right? But I think, we talk about soil bacteria and bacterial diversity. And if you're growing your, composting or raising chickens, which I know nothing about, but we're doing that, right? Meditating, doing yoga, and then good old fashioned strength training. I mean, you and I are both, on the same lines with that. I know. So, deadlifting, squatting, pull-ups, like just being able to move your body around in kind of these primal ways. And, look at these old physiques like, Lee Haney and Arnold back in the day. I mean, having all that muscle is really good for your self-confidence, for your bone structure, for testosterone in both men and women, growth hormone. I mean, there's a million metabolic properties. We could do 3 hours on just muscle alone, Tristan, I'm sure. But so those are the things, that I really generally that do in my life. And then also being very consistent with sleeping. This whole context could be woven into the canvas of the circadian rhythm discussion. And, we're always on our phones now and checking Instagram, YouTube, and watching all this stuff before we go to bed. And I think that's really just a bad cycle to get into. So try and go to bed at, 9:30, 10 every night. It doesn't matter what I have to do. I just got to go to bed at that time. And it really makes a huge impact in my health. And so these are all basic stuff, right? There's nothing too fancy, but it's like all the mundane basic things, if you just do them consistently over time, have a huge effect on your life. So.
All right. So keeping stress low, eating real foods, and getting to sleep. You got any tips, just quick tips to that people can use to get to sleep earlier, or to just sleep better throughout the night in general?
Quick tips. Yeah. Download the Insight Meditation Timer. And so this is a really good timer through the Insight Meditation Society. So it's a wonderful timer. Just meditate just 5 minutes. And once you can go longer, of course. And while you're sleeping, we could do another one on this, Tristan, is mouth taping. So a lot of people breathe through their mouth while they're sleeping, and that can cause your tongue to actually collapse in your airway. So if you just take some 3M micropore tape, I have a whole video on it if you want, interviewed a sleep disorder specialist on this topic. That has been a huge game changer, particularly for men. If your wife or girlfriend or spouse or whoever, your partner knows that you snore, you're breathing through your mouth, and that's causing sleep disorder breathing. So your dreams, your recall, growth hormone, everything will boost if you breathe through your nose while you sleep. So those are some of the things that I found to be really helpful.
Awesome. Awesome, man. Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming on. Again, I'm talking to Mike Mutzel. If you check out his YouTube channel, make sure to go and subscribe to his channel. Check out a lot of the interviews that he's done. I think it's probably one of the more interesting YouTube channels. Like whenever he puts out a video, I'm always going to watch it. So love the content you put out. Love that you interview such a variety of people with a variety of opinions on a variety of topics. And so check out High Intensity Health on YouTube. Where else can people find you? And if you got any last thoughts before we take off, go ahead and drop them now.
Well, first of all, Tristan, thanks for the opportunity. I've been following your work for quite some time, so it's an honor to chat with you, and I really appreciate you reaching out. Yeah, in my blog is highintensityhealth.com. I have a lot of older posts on Mike Mutzel. I started that like way back in 2008 or whatever, so people want that. But yeah, most of the current stuff, highintensityhealth.com, and then on Instagram, I'm Mike Mutzel, and on Facebook, it's Mike Mutzel MS. So yeah, I'd love to connect with the audience. If you guys have any questions, let me know. If I'm ever in South America, Tristan, you and I will catch up and do an in-person video. We'll post it on our channel. So again, really appreciate your work and opportunity. This was a lot of fun.
Right on. Well, next time you're in the neighborhood in the middle of nowhere in the Andes of Ecuador, you just give me a call. But yeah, man, we can have some fun out here. So good talking to you. Fantastic to finally meet. Love your work. And thanks for coming on. You guys can find more at primaledgehealth.com. You can contact me either via Facebook on my Primal Edge Health page or through my website at primaledgehealth.com. And be sure to check out my wife's, I'm going to shill here for a moment, for my wife's cookbook, the Ketogenic Edge Cookbook, a training manual for paleo, ketogenic, for low carb, ketogenic, and paleo cuisine. I mean, I can't say enough positive things about this book. There's been a lot of comments while we're going here about the book. And so thanks to everybody who's been enjoying it, for leaving positive reviews. We're really stoked to finally have it out. And I saw my wife working hard on it for over a year. And so we're just stoked to have that out and share that with you guys. So you can find us at primaledgehealth.com. That's the only place you're going to find the cookbook. Check out Mike Mutzel at High Intensity Health on YouTube. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.